Who the heck is Hank and why is he eating cakes and donuts? That's the question we're going to be answering today. And if that doesn't make any sense to you, the idea is we're going to be talking about the ways that yarn comes and what the terminology means so that the next time you go shopping, you have a completely clear understanding of all of that. So let's dive in. If you haven't figured out by now, crochet has its own sort of terminology, jargon, language that as a beginner can be so confusing. Sometimes even as you start to get into the craft and you've done a few things, it still is like, wait, is that a skein? Is that a skein? Is that a, what the heck is that? So today we're going to do some quick tutorials on answering those questions for you so it all makes a little bit more sense and is a little bit clearer than mud.
Oh, now I get it.
Hope you enjoy this. Let me know for sure, but we're going to dive right in. Well, first we're going to talk about, is it a skein or a skein or skiing, or how do you say that word? If you're nerdy like me, then you might have already looked up the Webster's definition and even Googled how do you say that? And the proper pronunciation is actually skein, Skane, skein. Now, a lot of people, and even myself, when we don't hear other people using that, we say skein because that's kind of what it looks like. And there are certain dictionaries that will give you an alternative pronunciation that says skein. So while it's not entirely wrong to say skein, most people are going to say skein, and that is the technical correct pronunciation. Now, skein really can be two different things. Some people use skein to be kind of all-encompassing, meaning that anything that a yarn comes in is considered a skein. Other people are going to kind of reduce that definition to something that's very specific that I'll show you here in a second. It doesn't really matter because the other types of yarn have very specific definitions. So we're going to cover those as well. And if you kind of just you use skein as a generic term, then that works. But for some people, this is what a traditional skein is. Now, you can see this is very common. This is how it is often sold in like the big box stores. It comes in big sizes. It comes in small sizes. It's kind of oblong shaped, and there's usually a way that you can center pull from the inside. If you're lucky, you don't get what's called yarn barf, which means you basically pull on this and a whole big wad of yarn comes out. Or you can take the sleeve off and actually use it from the outside as well. And that's a whole different level of personal preference, whether you want to center pull or outside pull. There are pros and cons to both ways, so just kind of pick whatever works for you. But this is the classic understanding of skein. So this is what most people are definitely going to call a skein, although skein is also used for all of the rest of these that I'm going to share with you. So consider that a skein. So that's lesson number one. The next thing that we get into is what kind of brings up old grandma vibes. And that is the traditional ball. And this is actually kind of like a mohair blend, I think. I'm not sure. I got it as a gift, but it is the, when we think of cats and yarn, this is kind of what we think of. Now, the ball of yarn is a great sort of, it's very handy because it's transportable, but it rolls around. So if you're using this, you're going to want something that you can kind of put it in so that as you pull this off, It's not racing around your work surface, but this is always going, I say always, almost always, this is going to be something that you're going to create after you've bought your yarn. Very rarely does yarn come sold as a ball of yarn. And part of the reason for that is because these different ways, sometimes the yarn can be wound or created a little bit tight. And we don't want that because it'll kind of smush the fibers together, and we definitely don't want smushed fibers. We can think of the ball as grandma's friend, because this is what we think of when we think of all of these old time kind of crochet and knit patterns, is all the balls of yarn that went into them. Now let's figure out who the heck Hank is and what that's all about. A hank of yarn is traditionally something that you're going to find kind of the indie dyers or hand dyers or specialty yarns. Those are going to be in hanks when there are larger quantities of them. They can be in hanks, even smaller quantities, but more often the larger quantities. And you can see this is kind of twisted. So I have one here for you. This is an alpaca blend. You can see it's twisted. If you untwist this, it kind of comes out like that. And then it's just kind of this big thing. And these are tied together usually. You can see there's a strand here. Usually there's another strand. Yep, there it is right there. Now, if you try and crochet directly from this, you are going to give yourself a huge headache. This is going to tangle on you like there is no tomorrow, and it is a nightmare. So this is not something that you want to work directly from. You're going to want to wind this into a ball or use a winder and make it into a cake so that it is much easier to use, because this itself just is not really conducive to very much. This you're going to want to put on either a Swift, or recruit somebody that can kind of do the old fashioned, when you worked with your grandma and she was winding the yarn into balls, you'd hold them on your hands. I'll actually maybe do a video of how I do it. I kind of cheat and I turn a TV tray upside down and use that as a Swift, because I don't own a Swift. But from there, it is then going to go on a contraption like this, which is called a winder. And the yarn comes through here and it hooks onto this part here. And you just twist this. And as you twist it, it winds it all together in what's called a cake. Now, the cake makes it a lot easier to actually work from, as opposed to this, which is very challenging to work from. So, what the heck is a cake? You probably, if you've done any shopping at like Michael's or Joann's, you've probably seen cakes. This one's actually from Hobie. And cakes are wound together. They often have, you can work from the outside or you can work from the inside, but it kind of looks like this. They're very popular right now to kind of show the tonal patterns, but even a solid color can be wound into a cake. So this is what it looks like after it comes off the winder that I used. Cakes make it really, really easy to use because they sit flat, they don't walk all over the place, they're really handy, and it's a nice way to work with the yarn when you're actually working on a project. Now, there are a lot of people that believe you should not cake all of your yarn when you first buy it. You really want to leave it in the hank as long as possible, because when it's in a hank, it's not wound as tightly, and so the fibers don't get all pressed together and smushed like they can if you're winding too tight onto a cake. So that's the other thing to keep in mind, is keep things in their natural form from the company or the dyer as long as possible until you're ready to use it. And frankly, I think they look really pretty that way. And there's one more form that you can often find yarn in that's much less frequent, but it still comes up, especially if you're buying more of the premium yarns in smaller quantities. And that is called a donut. Now, this one's been around a little while, so it's not quite as nice looking as it otherwise would, but you can see there's a hole in there, so it kind of looks like a donut. Now, this keeps the yarn nice and airy. It's wound very lightly so that there's a lot of air in there, and it shows off the premium yarns very nicely, especially the thinner yarns like the fingering or lace weights, or even sometimes the sport weights. So that's where you're going to find the donuts quite a bit, and most of the time you're going to find these in the higher end stores, or the premium type yarns, as opposed to something like the skeins, where you can get them quite a bit and they're pretty easy, or cakes often come in more of the box store fashion too. So the donuts are kind of the underappreciated type, and the least known as far as titles go. So you probably have heard skeins and cakes and maybe even hanks, but donuts, maybe not quite so much. That's it. That's our basic tutorial on who the heck Hank is and why he's eating our cakes and our donuts. So
Anybody got any questions so far?
What's a flank?
hopefully you enjoyed that. It's a little bit of fun, just a quick short video. If you do like this content, make sure that you click the like button, share it with somebody else that might be learning crochet right along with you, and subscribe so you always have great content to watch when you're working on your next crochet project.